A very good day to everyone. I am Jaspreet and I will be your moderator for today's webinar. On behalf of Beroe, I'd like to welcome you all to the webinar on converged sourcing of transient travel and meetings from Beroe Insights. Talking a bit about the topic for today's webinar, both travel and meetings are one of the biggest spend areas of most large organizations. Fortune 500 organizations spend a minimum of upwards of 200 million annually on these two categories combined. In today's webinar, we'll see how combined sourcing can be implemented to drive the next generation of strategic sourcing in these two categories. Before I go any further and introduce you to the main presenters, I'll be sharing a bit about the general set of instruction for all the attendees of today's webinar. First up, please note that all the attendees will be placed on mute. During the course of the presentation, if you would like to post any questions, you will find a box on the right hand side of your screen, indicated in red on the slide. I would request you to type out your question and hit the send button as and when you have the question. We will make sure to note down all the questions and cover them towards the end of the session. If you experience any connection issues, I would request you to please close the window, go back to the email and try connecting using the same link. If you still have any more problems, I would request you to please email Puneet, whose email address you will find in the email which was shared with you. I will now quickly introduce the speakers for today. First up is Harshita Thukral, who is the main presenter for today's webinar. She is the business travel expert at Beroe. In her 1.5 years at Beroe, she has gained extensive knowledge and expertise in developing insights based on travel management best practices across the globe. She has written several thought leadership articles and white papers covering a variety of travel subcategories, including car rental, airline, and hotels, which have been focused on both US and Europe. We also have our co-presenters, Mr. Chris Nicholas. Chris is a veteran of more than 20 years in the travel management industry. His early career as director of government sales for a division of J&J led him to open his own TMC back in the early 90s. His TMC was then acquired by one of the major TMCs in the US, and he moved on to the role of VP of Business Development. From there, he set up the meeting and events division in the organization, and last year, in 2013, he also opened his own business travel consultancy, Travel Management Advisor. He is a consultant to many TMCs, corporations, and industry suppliers. Most recently, he presented an educational session at the 2014 GBTA convention in Los Angeles, and he regularly speaks at various industry events in the US. Without further ado, I will now pass it on to the presenters.
Thank you, Jaspreet, for the introduction. Good day, everyone. I welcome you all to this webinar, which deals with a significant shift impacting the business travel industry recently. By the end of this webinar, you will have a clear understanding of what is converged sourcing all about, what is there for you in it, who all are doing it, and how can you approach it. But before we delve further into the discussion, I would like to mention that the air travel and hotel will remain our key focus areas during the entire discussion. To give you an overview of the webinar, the primary component will be the introduction and evolution of converged sourcing. This would be followed by the benefits and challenges of converged sourcing. Subsequently, we will try and ratify the adoption of this shift in the industry with certain case examples. And finally, we will discuss the modus operandi of converged sourcing. But before we start, I would like to set the stage with a brief introduction to business travel. Business travel is employee travel for the purpose of business. That could be a customer or sales visit, or an employee traveling to attend a meeting or an event. The industry usually classifies business travel into transient business travel. Now, transient business travel is basically an individual employee travel and is usually outsourced to a travel management company. The second part of business travel is the group business travel. Group business travel is basically a group of 10 or more people traveling to attend a meeting or an event. Also known as meetings travel, the management of group travel is outsourced to an event management company. There is one question that comes to most people's mind. Is business travel that critical a spend? Can't it be managed ad hoc? I would like to say that it can't be managed ad hoc. Let me give you a reason why. If I share you certain spend figures of the large Fortune 500 companies, starting with the transient business travel, most companies spend nearly 1 to 5% of their revenue on transient travel, which translates into $200 to $1,400 million annually. If I talk about industries who are the highest spenders and the lowest spenders in this category, then IT and BFSI would be the top spend contributors here, followed by industries like pharma, telecom, and CPG. And the lowest spend contributors would be the mining, engineering and construction, and the chemicals. Now, if I take you to the group business travel section of it, then most companies spend nearly 0.3 to 1.4% of their revenue on group travel. Some experts also say that it's nearly 35% of transient travel. This translates into $60 to $400 million annually. Here also, the pharma, IT, and BFSI are the highest spend contributors, followed by automotive, telecom, and CPG, and lastly, the mining and chemicals. Most buyers often ask us, are they a strategic account for their supplier? I would say that irrespective of what your meetings or transient spend is, if you are spending $15 to $50 million annually with an airline, then you are a strategic account for that airline. And if you are spending nearly $50 million annually with a hotel chain, then you are a strategic account for that hotel. Now, having talked about business travel, let me relate this to the basic concept of converged sourcing. Starting with the transient business travel, the main component of transient business is air component, contributing nearly 45% to the total cost of transient business, followed by hotel that contributes nearly 29%. Akin to transient business is the group business. Here, air component contributes 16%, followed by accommodation or what we call hotel and meeting space contributing nearly 24%. If you can see, For group travel, the hotel contribution is higher here, primarily because the cost of meeting space is added to the existing cost of sleeping rooms. Now, as a starting point, if we combine the air sourcing for the transient and the group business, followed by the combined sourcing of hotel for the transient and the group business, then this would fall under the category of the converged sourcing process. Now, if I give you an example of a company who has nearly $400 million spent in transient travel and nearly $250 million spent annually in meetings travel, and if this company combines all its air sourcing to a single airline like a Southwest or a WestJet and combines all its hotel's needs for both transient and meetings to a single hotel chain like a Hilton in US, then this would fall under the converged sourcing. According to one of our industry experts, 1 out of every 8 companies is considering to shift to converged sourcing. Now, this was the basic concept of converged sourcing. But let me take you a step back to understand why did this concept of converged sourcing evolve. If I take you a decade back to 2003, when the average business travel spend of a Fortune 500 company was 0.99% of their revenue, that time the companies had separate transient travel and meetings department independently sourcing with the same set of suppliers. That means both the departments were procuring same services but in silos. The lack of procurement involvement, I would say, was the main reason here. But as the time progressed, there was development of procurement teams in business travel sourcing. This procurement team was able to identify some similarities in the sourcing processes of the transient travel and the meetings. The first similarity identified by the procurement team was the coherent needs of transient travelers and group travelers or meetings travelers. That is, both of them travel point to point and need basic sleeping rooms or sleeping rooms with basic amenities at the start. Another similarity that was identified by the procurement team was the similarity in demand pattern. This similarity is also confirmed by the Global Business Travel Association survey that says both transient and group travelers travel in mid of week, usually a Tuesday, Wednesday or a Thursday. Another important factor identified by the procurement team was the outsourced supplier selection, or what we say an outsourced nature of procurement. As I had already mentioned in the introduction, that the transient travel management is outsourced to a travel management company and the meetings travel management is outsourced to an event management company. So there comes the similarity. These three main factors led to the evolution of a converged sourcing model, what we have as of today, that is 2014, evident on your screens. Since the evolution of converged sourcing up till now, the actual definition of converged sourcing has matured a lot. Let me take you through the various components of converged sourcing. Converged sourcing in its basic form is basically combining the sourcing methodology and contracting of the transient and the group travel. The vital component of converged sourcing is the strategic sourcing approach. We all know that transient travel has a more systematic sourcing approach that is, the corporate travel has a more systematic approach than the group travel. Even Fortune 500 companies have annual contracts, structured RFPs, and standardized contracts for corporate travel. But the management of meetings sourcing is very ad hoc in nature. They take up an event-by-event approach for group travel purposes. Now, using a strategic sourcing approach would imply that we use standardized sourcing processes and centralized procurement that would be applicable to both transient and group travel. Supplementing my strategic sourcing approach is our next component, supplier consolidation. By supplier consolidation, we mean that we use the same set of airlines and hotels for both transient and group travel. Another important component of converged sourcing is having preferred supplier relationships. We have observed that most companies have preferred supplier relationships for their corporate travel or transient travel programs, but not for their group travel programs. By preferred supplier relationships, we mean that we have a partnered approach with our suppliers. Let me try and explain to you this with an example. Suppose if in a company, most of its travelers arrive at a hotel on a Tuesday, but the hotel could benefit if the same set of travelers arrived on a Wednesday, and the buyer organization can easily shift to it. Then if the buyer organization adopts this shift in behavior, then it will create a win-win situation for both. The last component of converged sourcing would be consolidated volume bargaining with both airlines and hotels for their transient and group needs. So far we have discussed the evolution and the characteristics of converged sourcing. But then what is there for you in it and why you should adopt it? To resolve it, allow me to bring to the table the benefits of converged sourcing. Starting with, converged sourcing provides the advantage of increased bargaining power with the suppliers. With combined air and hotel volumes, the buyers tend to have control of the demand side of the supply-demand equation. Accompanying my increased bargaining power is the next benefit, that is the higher discounts and the value-added services. With consolidated volumes and preferred supply relationships, the buyers can easily negotiate for extra services with both hotels and airlines. With airlines, the buyers can negotiate for a priority check-in, a seat upgrade, lounge or a club membership, free tickets or waivers. With hotels, the buyers could negotiate for a late checkout, early check-in, room upgrades, free Wi-Fi and free nights. Next in line is the advantage of a systematic sourcing approach. This converged sourcing provides standardized RFP templates and consistent terms and conditions to both transient and group travel. Another advantage of converged sourcing would be the improved policy compliance. We've encountered that policy non-compliance is a major issue concerning the meetings category manager. They say that nearly 40% of all the meetings bookings done are out of policy bookings. So if we use converged sourcing, we would be able to apply certain compliance components of the transient travel to the group travel. As an example, you could mandate the exception reporting for group travel as you do for transient travel. Another advantage of converged sourcing is the optimum resource utilization. Since you're using a single agency to make bookings for both transient and group, you could improve the utilization rates of the resources. Lastly, and most importantly, converged sourcing can help improve traveler security and risk management. It will allow you to comply to your duty of care obligations. Recently, we have seen remarkable improvements in ensuring safety of transient travelers, but not much attention has been paid to the safety of meetings travelers. With converged sourcing, we can apply the risk management best practices of transient travel to meetings travel. To summarize, converged sourcing can help you attain cost savings of 4 to 12% depending upon which industry you belong to, and also improve spend visibility and management. As we all know that good things come hard, so does converged sourcing with some of the potential challenges in its adoption. Next, we have challenges of converged sourcing. If I define challenges of converged sourcing, I could classify it into the external and the internal challenges. The foremost external challenge would be the limited supplier capabilities, which means that an airline you choose may not operate on all the required routes, and a hotel you may choose may not be suitable for both your transient and group needs. Another external challenge facing converged sourcing is sometimes there takes place a clash of interests among the buyer and the supplier. If I explain this to you by taking the case of hotel sourcing, then the buyers usually demand equal level of discounts for both transient and group travel. The hotels on the other side are able to provide a high band of discounts to transient travel, but not an equal level of discounts to the group travel. So there comes a roadblock. Apart from external challenges, we have internal challenges too. One of the internal challenges to converged sourcing is the contrasting sourcing approach. We've discussed this earlier, like transient travel is an analyzed process with a single decision maker. On the contrary, the meeting sourcing process is an ad hoc process having involvement of multiple decision makers. This contrast is a major hindrance to converged sourcing. Another challenge to this process is the divergent travel and meetings policy. Here, I would like to emphasize on the inconsistent meetings-related processes and approvals compared to definite processes and approvals for transient travel. Lastly, the most critical challenge to converged sourcing is the resistance to change within the organization. I would also like to relate this majorly to the meeting sourcing. We all know that the meeting supplier base is highly fragmented. So the meetings buyer tend to have personal favorites with respect to suppliers. Since converged sourcing relies mostly on business relationships rather than personal favorites, so the buyer organization faces challenges from internally within the organization. These were the basic challenges of converged sourcing. But an ideologist once said, every problem has in it the seeds of its own solution. Let me now hand over this discussion to Chris, who from his industry experience will elaborate upon the potential solutions to these problems. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Harshita, and hello everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today to talk about this growing trend in the industry. And as with any change, there will be challenges to overcome. So let's take a look at these key challenges and how you might approach them. The first challenge is that potential partners have limited capabilities. And it's a best practice nowadays to look at negotiating agreements with airline alliances like the Star Alliance or One World that increase your supplier base to multiple airlines so that your air program reaches as many route structures as possible. If you don't, you could end up with limited routes offered by a single airline or airlines and not achieve the savings you need to generate. Similarly, it's a best practice to negotiate preferred agreements with global or national hotel chains like Marriott, Hilton, and IGH and others that have properties that are suitable for both transient travel and meeting needs. The next challenge is one that Harshita had mentioned earlier about the mismatch or conflict of buyer and supplier interest. It's important to remember that you both want the best possible outcome. I once had a travel manager tell me that the worst possible case is to negotiate an agreement that ends up putting a supplier out of business. If their supplier is out of business, then they're not going to be much help to the buyer. So he wants to make sure that the supplier profits. So you want to adopt a partnered approach. Consider your supplier a valued partner, and what you both want is the best possible outcome. This vested procurement approach leads to a win-win situation where both parties are pleased with the results. An example from the travel industry is trying to match your demand needs with the supplier needs. See if you can help airlines and hotels fill in their demand gaps. You'll get lower pricing and they will get additional revenue. The next challenge is that many companies have a contrasted sourcing approach to transient travel and meeting and events, mainly because these types of travels have different goals or purposes. In order to overcome this problem, you could implement a strategic meeting management program within your travel department. SMMP has a combination of policies, processes, and technologies all their own, and you can streamline the sourcing of meeting with transient travel policies. This approach leverages the spend of each group, and the combination makes each stronger. So converging sourcing and overcoming the problem of different purposes of transient travel and meeting and event goals by improving the coordination and communication between the two teams. Finally, to overcome the resistance to change within the organization, you need to have an effective communication plan. There are many factors that can derail change, but ineffective communication most certainly will always be in the top 3. So it's a good idea to keep in mind factors that can derail or kill change. Dr. Ken Blanchard and John Britt identified 13 factors within organizations that can lead to change being unsuccessful. In their book, Who Killed Change, published in 2007, they discussed the importance of developing a plan that identifies each of the factors seen here and the potential each could have on successfully implementing the change you want. All of these influencing factors should be kept in mind, mentally reviewed, and checked off, if you will, just to be certain that one or more of them won't kill the change you want to bring about. There are 3 primary elements that may lead to the death of change. The first is that the people leading the change think that announcing the change is the same thing as accomplishing the change. And that's rarely, if never, the situation. The second important element is that concerns about change are repressed and not addressed by the leadership team. And the third is that those being asked to implement the change are not involved in the planning for the change. That's why effectively communicating why, how, and what the benefits of change are to the key stockholders and influencers is critical to the successful outcome. Now let's Now to talk about the adoption level as it currently stands with converging meetings and transient travel spend, I'd like to turn this back over to Harshita.
Thanks, Chris, for your valuable insights. Till now, we've talked about the pitfalls and potential solutions. But then, this is a widespread trend. So, who all are adopting it? Starting with, according to Business Travel News, Corporate Travel 100, that releases an annual list of the 100 biggest travel buyers in US, in 2013, 51 of the top 100 companies were in the early stages of planning to adopt converged sourcing, primarily valuing the potential benefits of it. 24 of the top 100 companies have implemented a part of converged sourcing, adopting an integrated reporting approach. And 17 of the top 100 companies have full-fledgedly adopted the converged sourcing, also supplier consolidation. According to Beroe, we found that in 2013, nearly 2% of Fortune 500 companies have initiated this process of converged sourcing. By 2018, this trend is expected to pick up and the figures are expected to reach 12%. The major companies adopting this change or leading this change would be the pharma, IT, telecommunications, banking, financial services, and CPG. The other companies would have either adopted this trend in the early stages or a part of it. Here also, US is the leader in adopting the change, primarily because it has a matured business travel sourcing process, and then in line would be Europe. Now, if I'm to validate the adoption of this trend, then I would like to ratify it with a case file of a pharmaceutical company, which is a Fortune 500 company based out of Europe. This company encountered a bizarre situation. That is, it had two sets of employees traveling to the same location and to the same hotel, but paying different price per room night. These two sets of employees included the corporate travelers and the group travelers. To overcome this disparity in pricing, the company wanted to combine its air and hotel program for transient and meetings travel. This company, as you can see, adopted a regional approach for its two regions covering more than 50 cities. They took up regional supplier consolidation and volume bargaining as a part of converged sourcing. The entire integration process, however, took nearly 24 to 36 months. Nevertheless, at last, the company was able to consolidate its regional accommodation and meeting space needs with two hotel chains and its transient and group air needs with 3 low-cost carriers and 4 full-service carriers in these two regions. Consequently, the company was able to save 10% of its business travel spend. To validate a further adoption in the industry, I have another case of a financial service company that is basically headquartered in UK. But then this company has more than 50% of its spend in the US. The management of this company noticed that the meetings and the transient travel department were working in silos, and they had the least procurement involvement in business travel sourcing. The company wanted to increase the role of procurement in sourcing business travel and wanted to take the advantage of leveraged sourcing. This company also took the help of its travel management company to attain this objective. If I look at the corporate travel spend of this company in US, this company was spending $300 million annually on transient travel, out of which $120 million went to the air component and $84 million went to the hotel component. If I take a look at its meeting spend, then the company was spending $110 million annually on its meetings or group travel, which I would say, out of which 21 million was shared by the air component and 27.5 by the hotel component. When the procurement team come into play, they adopted a converged sourcing process and forged preferential supply relationships with 2 regional airlines and 1 regional hotel chain in the US. This company was able to save nearly $8 million over a period of 1 year. Having seen these case studies adopting the new sourcing model, let's move on to our final section of the webinar, where we will see what should be a company's approach towards converged sourcing and the prerequisites for it. The first and foremost prerequisite would be the centralized governance structure. The centralized governance structure would mean we have a centralized decision making and policy formulation. Considering procurement team takes the lead in converged sourcing, so I would recommend that the travel and the meetings team report to the procurement team. Adding to the list of prerequisites is the need for internal spend data for transient and group business. You need this data because you need to have negotiations at the buying table. I mean volume negotiations. So gather the spend data from your supplier data, from your expense reports, from a booked agency data or your purchase orders. Another prerequisite for converged sourcing is having a single TMC, that is a travel management company, or a lead TMC. This will help you in data aggregation and also will help you negotiate with the airlines or other suppliers. If you have these prerequisites in place, then you can scale down your time to implement the converged sourcing by nearly 20%. These 3 attributes are the must-to-have for converged sourcing. However, there are a few more attributes that can be good to have for converged sourcing purposes. Here I would like Chris to introduce us to a few enablers of converged sourcing.
Thank you, Harshita. To be sure, having a strategic meeting management program already in place is one of the key enablers for combining travel management sourcing, because SMMP already has a structured approach to meetings and events related contracting. Therefore, it facilitates combining negotiations with transient travel. It's true that focusing more volume on fewer properties equals lower cost. This has been validated many times. Personally, I remember back in 2012 working with a Fortune 500 consumer products company that had a mature SMMP program in place and a mature transient travel team. While the 2 teams essentially had the same function, they did not source together as one team. When they merged the 2 groups into one, they increased their savings and improved their processes and their outcomes. So another important element of SMMP is the online meeting technology platforms, which is our second enabler for leveraged sourcing. Online platforms facilitate internal meeting data collection, which otherwise might rely on manual means like purchase order tracking. Online platforms also enable policy compliance and ease of booking arrangements for meeting attendees apart from the scheduled reporting algorithms and documentation they provide. And lastly, commercial corporate cards can be a valuable source of information for leverage spend. They can assist buyers in determining air spend by carrier or most frequently visited hotels in addition to the important travel destinations for the company. Corporate card data is invaluable as a tool for assisting meeting and event planning in locations that are not frequently visited by the company. This data can assist the SMMP team in hotel and event RFP inclusion. So until now, we've discussed the prerequisites and the enablers for leverage sourcing. Now Harshita will take us through how you can approach converging sourcing.
Thank you, Chris, for your valuable information regarding the enablers of converged sourcing. After all our discussion relating to the approach to converged sourcing, let me take you to the final part of our discussion, that would be the roadmap for converged sourcing. As a step 1, Beroe recommends to adopt a phased regional approach. We suggest that start with a region that accounts for 25 to 45% of all your business travel spend. From our industry experience, we've noticed that most companies start their integration process from the US and then Europe. As a step 2, when you have selected your region, negotiate for consolidated air volumes. Use your TMC support here. Negotiate deals with airlines or airline alliances with the help of your TMCs. This is because these travel management companies maintain a good rapport with airlines owing to their nature of multiple account handling. Negotiate for discounts and fixed rates on your high traffic routes. Also negotiate for value-added services apart from price negotiation. As a step 3, after you have negotiated your air volumes, negotiate your hotel volumes. Here, use an event management company support. Negotiate with a regional or a national hotel chain that can cater to the needs of both transient and group travel. The EMC's experience and expertise will put you in a better negotiating position with the hotels. Negotiate for discounts, rates, last room availability terms, meeting space, and value-added services with hotels. Lastly, in order to measure the success or the outcome of converged sourcing, use the unified reporting services provided by either your travel management company or the event management company. Unified reports will help you evaluate the performance of your integrated sourcing process. To summarize it all, we suggest that implement converged sourcing only when you have enough spent on your business travel, when you have an independent procurement team who is ready to lead this effort of converged sourcing, and when you have all the prerequisites in place for the convergence. This was all from my end. Next part of the webinar would be having a Q&A session, the questions that we've received during the webinar. I would like to hand it over to Jaspreet.
Thank you, Harshita and Chris. That was a very insightful discussion and presentation. I must say, the case examples of the BFSI and the pharma organizations were really helpful. We're now going to take a minute and aggregate all the questions. So please give us a minute. All right. So we have the list of questions with us. So the first question is, on one hand, you say that the sourcing of transient and group travel varies in terms of their goals and objectives. But then you say that they have coherent needs. So how do you think converse sourcing will be possible for this similar yet so different categories? I think I'll pass it on to Harshita for this one. Harshita, would you like to comment?
Sure, Jasprit. I agree that transient and group travel vary a lot, and on the same note, they are very similar. If I am supposed to quote that both group travelers and transient travelers, they travel point to point and at the basic level need sleeping room with basic amenities. So if we want to adopt a converged sourcing process, we could start with this baseline and negotiate with airlines for point-to-point travel and negotiate with the hotels for sleeping room nights. So this would be our focus for the converged sourcing at the start. As and when we progress, we can define similarities and then progress our sourcing approach.
Thank you, Harshita. So we have another question, and this one seems from the pharma industry. So the question goes, when we talk about converged sourcing, we have spoken about internal employee movement. How do you think that this converged sourcing will accommodate the external delegate travel, like the healthcare professionals in the pharma industry? So Harshita, you'd like to take this as well?
Yes, Jasprit. I do have an answer to this question. I would say that the technology part handles this very well. We use online booking tools provided by TMCs, and they do have a guest component registration there. So we can easily accommodate for a guest registration or a guest traveler booking. So I think this should cater to this answer to this question. But Chris, would you like to add some points to it?
Oh, thank you very much, Harshita. I certainly would. Having the experience early in my career with Johnson & Johnson and being the director of government sales, and as a hospital district manager, we had a lot of guests who came in and spoke at meetings. And in the past, before technology was present, it was very difficult to centralize the processes. But now, because of the technology on online booking tools and reporting tools, I believe that it should be a best practice to centralize the process. It's very much easier to do, and I believe, and I keep saying this, you have to look at the outcome. The outcomes are much improved because when we have process improvements and you're following the processes, you're going to have a much more consistent, reliable outcome. And back to the question that you had posed before, that first question, I would just like to introduce again something that's common to all of us so that we can look at the different goals, because travel for meetings and events does have a different goal than transient travel. Much like the same, though, if you have in the medical field, and we've all had the experience of having a primary care physician that follows us on a regular basis, that we do regular things with. And hopefully not too many of us have had to go to an emergency room. It's there, the goal in an emergency room is to stabilize the patient, which is a very different goal than the primary care physician has. And yet both of them use the same fundamental process of history and physical to determine what course of action to take. And so I like to think of it in a commonality type of a way, that you can have the same processes and manage them extremely well, even though they have different goals. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Chris. So we'll take up just one more question today, and this question is about the emerging markets. So we have spoken about converged sourcing as an emerging trend in US and Europe. So what is the scope of adoption in the emerging markets, specifically Asia Pacific and the Latin American regions? Harshita?
I agree with this question that this is an emerging trend in the US and Europe, majorly because these are matured markets in terms of sourcing business travel. But then this trend is expected to pick up in next 3 to 4 years in emerging markets like the Asia Pacific, Latin America, and Australasia, and many others. And I would again say that this effort would be led by companies like the pharma, the CPG, IT, and telecom. So it is expected to pick up in a 5-year time.
Thank you, Harshita. So that just about wraps up today's webinar. I'd like to thank you all for attending it, and I hope this was useful for all of us. There were a lot of practical insights that you could take away and which could help you give clarity and get you started on your path to converge transient and meetings travel spend. Thank you, folks. Have a great day today.